You're listening to the Light Novel Podcast. Visit us online at lightnovelpodcast.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Light Novel Podcast. On this episode, we're going to be taking a look at one of the more interesting things announced by J-Novel Club on their April Twitch stream, which was the announcement of a brand new imprint. And to help us learn more about that, we have Jonathon, who is the line manager for the new line, which is called J-Novel Pulp, as well as the manga and print lines for J-Novel Club. Welcome to the show, Jonathon.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And to help me grill Jonathon about this new thing, I have Jean-Luc.
Good morning.
I have Mirage.
Hello.
And I have Terrence.
Hey.
And we did throw out to the Discord, the Light Novel Discord that I run, we did throw out that we were going to be doing this podcast. So they contributed some questions, which most of them I think are ones that we were going to ask Jonathon anyway. But yeah, it just kind of gave us an idea of what exactly people are going to wonder about this. So Jonathon, you know what? How about we just start this off? Tell us about Pulp.
So Pulp is something that has a really long tradition in publishing history. It ties into a lot of subgenres. So, for example, in America, it ties into the dime novel, heroic tales. It ties into things like Conan the Barbarian. It ties into a lot of sci-fi short stories, things like early Bradbury, early Asimov. And this goes back really, I would definitely say at least from like the early 20th century and onwards, and as a form, it kind of changes and evolves. Sort of the key traits of pulp in general are things like it tends to be very action-focused, very adventuresome, a lot of serializations, long runs, or on the other hand, self-contained short stories. But it's not, grand, thought-provoking literature where, it's about how complicated of a sentence you can write. It's about giving people a good time that they can read on the cheap and then move on to the next thing. In a lot of ways, by comparison, for example, light novels are really a shining example of an evolution of pulp. So if you think about how Naro works, if you think about how a lot of light novel serialization works, you get your magazine or you're reading on Naro, you read your daily chapters, right? It comes quickly. It's a big story. It kind of twists and turns and goes up and down and, you meet your characters and all that. And then it's done. And you go, okay, that was nice, and you move on to the next thing. Naro titles in a lot of light novels aren't really meant to be high lit. It's low lit, it's low culture, and low culture is great. It's a lot of fun. And so we were kind of thinking, well, we're a company that really specializes in translating high volume, serialized action adventure genre content.
Right.
What else can we do that kind of lets us go beyond light novels? What can we do that'll let us diversify our catalog a little bit? Maybe offer something for people who are kind of a little tired of isekai and anime high school rom-com, but we can still give them that hit of an ongoing genre story that's got some action, maybe, aim it a little older. And we wanted something that would also really have its own character. A lot of the things that people say about Chinese web novels, about Korean web novels, is it's kind of similar to Japanese web novels with a bit of a twist. And that really kind of wasn't enough. If you remember, for example, when manhwa first started coming out in English and the backlash that had, we didn't want to kind of go into that space, let alone the fact that you have companies like Tencent and Silicon Valley, venture capitalists investing in the Chinese and Korean web novel spaces.
Right.
That's not good business for a small independent player. So we were looking for something that we could diversify with, that would be really interesting. I live in Berlin, and Germany has a really developed pulp history, especially after the wars. Starting in like the late 1950s, you had this huge boom through the 60s and the 70s of what were then called Groschenromane, penny novels. and they're little 64-page floppy magazines on cheap newsprint. And every week you get a story of some kind or another. And some of these have become huge franchises that have run for decades. So this seemed like something with a really good character, with, personality. These are huge heroes, really solid, globally proven franchises. And I read them for fun and I like them. So I kind of put some pressure on Sam. And I'm like, Sam, one day licenses are gonna get harder to find and the market's gonna mature, and look at anime history and what's always a good move. And a good move is always to have a couple of other little side hustles.
Right.
So that's not to say that, good books are ever a side hustle, but there's a reason why every anime company puts out at least a couple martial arts movies. You always want to have that little something that you do that's, it lets you refresh your brain and it lets you not have all your eggs in one basket. So that was the business reason behind it.
All right. Fantastic.
Probably that last bit's not so good.
Well, no, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean,
no.
One of the questions that a lot of people are asking about was
why would we do this?
Yeah, exactly.
It really is. It really is a thing. Like, it's one thing to be a fan of light novels, and it used to be back in the day. I don't know how true this is, and there's a lot of argument that it has changed as fandom starts at a younger age. It used to be that fandom in anime and manga would turn over roughly every 2 years. So somebody who became an anime fan when they went to university at 18 would stick with it until they were about 20. And then they would kind of move on to other things, or they might stick with it but be very casual. And we are seeing now that as people are getting into this at 12 and 13 more and more, that they're sticking with it longer.
Right.
And as things mainstream, like Attack on Titan, My Hero Academia, Viz is the number 2 comics publisher in the US. The number showed this last year, right? That the big 2 aren't Marvel and DC anymore. It's Scholastic and Viz.
Yes.
So one of the things that you realize as you spend more time with a certain genre of content is that you do get kind of burnt out on the tropes. And it's one thing to be a fan of light novels and to read 5 or 6 light novels at a time, and to be like, this is really fun, and I like these isekai titles and whatever else. And it's another thing when you're working on like 25 of them. And it's your job, and you're staring at these day in, day out, and you don't have a choice. So to have something that's very different in your work portfolio as well, it's just really refreshing. Everybody on staff has had a ball working on this.
Excellent.
Because, it is something that it's a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
And I think when you're reading as well, if you're a little tired of the new light novel offerings, to be able to just hop onto something else for a bit. And it is aimed a little older. These are, and even if you look at the covers and the artwork on the website, it's still recognizable, but it's definitely different.
Yeah, they have that very, I was saying to my wife, I said, they really reminded me a bit of, remember like the Strange Tales or whatever that like Marvel would do back in like the 60s, those comic covers that were aimed at like that slightly older horror audience and stuff like that. They really reminded me of that sort of feel, or even like the art style of like the old, more old penny novels, exactly as you were saying, right? The stuff that we saw in the 70s and stuff. Like, you're definitely right. Like, there's enough that you can connect, but there is a very different feel to them.
Yeah. And we knew that it would not fly under any circumstance to put that out as J-Novel Club title specifically. So, we are conscious of this. We are not saying these are like novels.
Right.
We're, it's on an imprint. It's separate. You can filter it out of the website if you don't like it. And if you do like it, we're very happy to have you.
Yeah, I never thought about it this way, but now that you explained it, the target audiences for pulp magazines is really quite similar to the target audience for Japanese light novels. And still, any of the 3 titles is radically different from anything we have out on the light novel market today in English.
Yeah. And serialized storytelling, not just now with COVID and whatever else, but it's really making a comeback. Naro's not the only place where people are posting web novels. You're posting, your OEL stuff. You have sites like AO3, and even in the last few years, you have these gigantic fan fiction arcs that run for years, or you have, it's like series are really back in. Ongoing things are really back in genre, and some of this is the rise of e-readers and tablets.
Right.
What were they saying? 50 Shades of Grey sold more Kindles than like any other book.
Oh, well, yeah.
Because you didn't have to show what you were reading.
Yeah.
And so the things that people would always feel conscious about reading, like if you see somebody on the U-Bahn here in Berlin and they're reading one of the major Heftromane, you know instantly what they're reading because the typesetting and the layout and the size is, I don't know if I necessarily say iconic, but it's unique. Nothing else prints like that. But if you see somebody reading it on their tablet, you don't know what they're reading.
Right.
And so people who would feel self-conscious about reading that and being judged by other people. And I guess it's kind of like the way, like if you go to Japanese bookstores, they wrap all your books for you. So nobody on the train sees your covers.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, like the rise of serialized storytelling. I mean, just this past week, we had Amazon announce the whole Amazon Vella thing, which is exactly that. It is essentially trying to get authors to write serialized books, and Amazon is paying them based on how many words are read by readers.
I kind of wonder if Amazon is maybe trying to muscle in on the Naro space or on like Wuxia World.
I would think so.
Yeah. This is clearly not going away. The nature of it might change. If you haven't read Kim Morrissey's article about this on ANN, about Mushoku Tensei, I think I'm pronouncing that right. And Naro and how Naro titles evolve. That's a really insightful article.
I think most of us are fans of Frog Kun.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, I mean, I guess this is sort of a interesting, I mean, now that we're talking about this whole thing, and obviously connections between sort of the light novel space and pulp and everything else. But obviously, these are not Japanese titles, and
No.
J-Novel Club up until now has been obviously pushing towards fans of Japanese media, whether it be, light novels, shoujo, manga. Are you sort of creating or thinking of any specific plans that you are going to try and push to gain entry into spaces that are not just for manga fans, like in terms of your advertising, or in terms of your even in terms, like, would you do a separate website at some point that kind of like, what are your are there any thoughts?
A separate website is definitely not on the cards.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense for us.
Right.
At the core of our business is the membership.
Right.
Part of being part of the J-Novel Club and having your membership is that you're on the forums, you're with the community, and it doesn't make sense to block off parts of that.
No, that's totally fair.
In terms of reaching new spaces, I sent out press releases to about 45 news sites in the sci-fi, horror, supernatural fiction space.
Awesome.
And none of them ran them.
Oof. Ouch.
It's really hard to break in.
Right.
Sending out e-arcs for review seems to be getting more traction. I think people don't believe it until you have a retail product.
Fair.
And that can be hard. There is definitely still some resistance in parts of, I think, the sci-fi media space to anime, manga, and Japanese content.
Even though that
and
you're specifically
even
talking.
though it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though the headline, I mean, you got the press release. The headline of the press release lists the biggest name in science fiction outside Doctor Who around the world. And like Locust didn't run that.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, maybe it'll be in the new print edition. I don't know. But yeah, getting that uptick is really hard. And all we can do is keep marketing, keep pushing. Yeah, we want these readers.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're a horror novel reader, we want you reading John Sinclair. if you like space opera, we want you reading Perry Rhodan. We want everybody reading Perry Rhodan. Perry Rhodan's amazing. They're all amazing. They're all really good titles. So yeah, but figuring out how to break in there, and some fandoms are harder than others. Like the supernatural fiction space, especially supernatural romance, is really hard to break into. It's a fandom and a section of fandom where if you're not self-pubbing and you're not on one of like the very established specific publishers and imprints, you're kind of invisible and nobody trusts you until you prove yourself. And in terms of the other sci-fi space, sorry, I'm not making, a multi-billion-dollar TV series for Disney Plus. So I guess that if your main coverage is going to be WandaVision and Winter Falcon, we're going to have to fight for limited column inches.
Right.
So it's part of the business.
That's interesting. So now at this point, then, obviously you're doing these for J-Novel Club members as the pre-pubs, the same way that you do your light novels, correct?
Yep.
Perfect. And then I'm assuming that you are also going to be doing ebook versions of these.
Yep. I think the pre-orders went up yesterday.
Oh, okay. I haven't searched Amazon this morning.
I'm like, that's like the one part of the process I'm not directly managing.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not entirely sure, but I believe they got posted. If they didn't get posted like in the last 48 hours, then they're going up at the very start of next week.
Perfect. All right. Awesome. And so now, just because I'm curious, and this wasn't necessarily a question that anybody was asking, but so the ebooks, so we know that obviously these are published in smaller parts. How exactly are you breaking them up on the J-Novel Club site, and how many parts, like what size are we kind of looking at in terms of the ebook releases?
So Sinclair and Jessica Bannister are published. Well, Jessica is not published in German anymore. That series has actually been wrapped up here for quite a while. Sinclair comes out weekly in 64-page installments, and they're A5 double columns, so they're pretty tightly packed text. We didn't actually realize quite how dense they were until we started working on it. And that's just part of the learning process of a new language pair.
Right.
And that's something that was also a really interesting part of doing these for us, was to see if we could apply our business model to another language pair, or if it was so tailored to Japanese content that it wouldn't be feasible to do it. So, we're definitely learning with that. So these come out weekly. It's 64 pages. It's a short story. We're putting 4 of those stories in one ebook.
Oh, okay.
So they're pretty chunky. It's like 320 pages.
Okay. Wow. That's excellent.
And Rhodan, we're doing 2-in-1s for that.
Okay.
So that comes out in, I think it's like B6 Neo comes out in. And that's 160 pages. So that's sort of like Reader's Digest size, if you remember Reader's Digest from back in the day. Like if your grandparents had a subscription.
Yes.
So, like, I mean,
are they going to be a
grabbed
different amount of credits on the page? Because
no, they're going to be standard premium credit.
Because it seems like John Sinclair is double the length of Perry Rhodan.
They're all going to be one premium credit.
Okay.
So, it's just how the split looked and how it worked. When we were doing the initial number crunching.
Right. And like what made sense story-wise and stuff like that.
Yeah. One of the issues, especially in the era of self-pubbing, is that people are more price sensitive in these genres. So when you're comping as a consumer, what does it cost to buy a J-Novel Club book? You're looking at what Yen Press and 7 Seas and Viz are charging for their books.
Right.
And it's the same on the bookshelf in the print version. When you're comping in these genres, you have a lot of people putting out their own short fiction and their own novels at lower prices than major publishers do.
Yes.
And so it is a more price sensitive sector. So that's something that we're kind of judging reaction to as well.
Okay. That's interesting. I didn't really think about that, but I guess that would be absolutely something you'd have to take into consideration.
And also, I'm price sensitive when I buy books. I wish I wasn't. So, giving people more for their money seems like a good move, at least with the volumes that you're going to sell the most units of.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So now, I mean, obviously, so you're launching these 3 titles. We're going to talk a little bit more about these titles, but since we're sort of in the whole pulp business side of things, now you're launching with 3 German titles. I understand, obviously, you've just said that Germany obviously has a rather mature pulp market. Are you actively looking at other languages right now, or are you waiting to see how these 3 do before you expand beyond? What can you even say?
We're still in data collection mode.
Mm,
I don't think that's going to shock anybody who knows how we work.
yeah.
Sam is the kind of guy who is totally willing to take a chance on things that look interesting, but before he expands on them, he always likes to see some numbers.
Yes. Fair enough.
So we're going to see how this does. There are definitely countries that I would consider for their histories and things first. Part of the problem is finding modern content and contemporary, even semi-contemporary content. Like, there's a publisher out there, and I can't remember their name, but they publish a lot of like 1920s and 1930s French titles.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And like that's their specialty, and they put out like 1 or 2 stories at a time. Italy has a really strong history in this, especially with Giallo. So before Giallo was a film genre, it was like a horror novel genre. So, that could be really cool. But, until we have an idea of where we're going and what we're doing with this, and like that we have stability in our workflow and everything else for German, expanding to another language pair is a significant undertaking.
Right. Fair enough.
And it's one that we want to, baby steps.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I have to admit that beside John Sinclair and Perry Rhodan, I'm not so familiar with the German pulp market myself. So if you could choose, you wish, what is there any other German pulp novel series that you would want to?
I'll mention the one that I want that we'll never get, and that I have said we'll never get. Like I wouldn't even consider printing it, which is G-Man Jerry Cotton.
Okay.
This is a series that's been running since the 1950s.
Yes.
And it's about an FBI agent who chases down gangsters. And there was a series of movies made in the 60s starring George Nader, who was kind of a B-movie star. He was one of the first out gay male performers in Hollywood, which crushed his career. And so he kind of ended up in Germany making these crime movies and becoming like a huge celebrity over here. Ended up writing one of the first gay sci-fi novels. But Jerry Cotton still runs. They've, moved him back and forth in places. But, I don't really like Law and Order in real life as much as I do in fiction, especially these days. Given the state of the world and American law enforcement.
Fair enough.
So it's not something that our readership would go for. And the readership that we would have to cultivate to put that out and be successful with it is probably not a readership I really want to court.
Fair. That's
so, I'll pick it up for fun. If I'm going on a long train journey, I will stop off, in the magazine shop and always pick up the new issue. But no, that's not a good commercial series.
Are there any high fantasy titles like that would be more similar to light novels?
Finding them is really hard because there was a big crash in the Heftromana market back in the late 80s. I think it was late 80s. It was like late 80s, early 90s. It kind of coincided with the video game, like the real, like the serious, like late Nintendo Master System boom. A lot of like the fantasy sci-fi titles have been out of print for a while. A lot of them came out of like the 60s and the 70s. It would be really cool to get some like DDR era sci-fi. And there are publishers that are putting that out who are dedicated, and that's all they do is they do small press runs of old communist era sci-fi. So that's something that, I'm not sure if it's commercially feasible to do it, but it's really cool, and I should be reading it for fun if I had time.
So then would you say that there is now, obviously we know you're, I do know Sam is going to wait until he sees how this goes and everything else, but would you say that there is some, based on the three titles you've licensed, they're very unlike, like you said, like they're not fantasy, they're not isekai, obviously. I mean, we have science fiction and horror pretty much. Would you say that there is some drive to have the pulp line offer genres or stories that are not entirely, that are separate or different than what we are typically seeing in the light novel space?
Um, yeah, some of it. The most important thing is that they're good.
Fair.
Yeah.
And that there's, stories available. And at the moment, what we're seeing here in Germany is that you've got a number of established titles, and those run and run and run, and getting something new off the ground is a real challenge.
Hmm.
And some of what runs and runs and runs is just not our wheelhouse.
Okay, fair enough.
There's a lot of Westerns that keep running here,
Oh.
and I don't think anybody in the US really reads Westerns anymore.
Probably not enough that you'd find them in the light
our-
novel
yeah,
space.
like our audience definitely is not going to read Westerns unless they're set on another planet. If there was a series that was doing the Cowboy Bebop thing, we'd be on that.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair.
If you ask a German, the stereotype about Americans would probably be that they always read Western.
Yeah, but you have to remember that I don't know if Karl May has been in print in English for the last 2 decades.
Oh, probably not.
Probably, I'm sure there's probably some. And there's probably a bunch of used copies floating around, but I remember looking for them for a while and never finding them.
Would you consider licensing Karl May?
Not as a J-Novel Club property.
Now I've fried your brain.
It's very strange because the way I learned who Karl May was is seeing Der Schuh des Manitou, which is a movie that I find kind of unwatchable now.
Yeah, it's a parody for those who don't know it. Anyone out of Germany.
It's not only a Western parody, it's the top grossing German film of all time.
Oh, really? Okay.
Or one of them. And what was funny in 2002 is kind of like borderline homophobic now. And then you see the film they made afterwards, and you're like, Traumschiff Surprise kind of goes over that border in uncomfortable ways.
Okay, yeah.
And then I didn't bother with Lissy and the Kaiser.
Speaking of out of print stuff and stuff that didn't age well with the current time, I'm not entirely sure, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Sam, in the last time we made an interview with him, he did say that finished or out of print or long time running series were kind of risky in light novel side. So why go with long running German? Is it different because it's different style? It's pulp and not like light novel, even if it's similar in some way?
Some of it comes down to how it's written. So with a series like John Sinclair, we licensed a number of individual stories. The way Sinclair is published is there are long runners in it, by which I mean 3 parts. There are done-in ones, and there is a lore, and the lore definitely has built over the last 50 years. But by and large, you can kind of drop in, drop out. If we finished our run of John Sinclair stories and they ended, you'd have a bunch of really nice little horror books. But you wouldn't feel like you weren't getting the end of a story.
Okay.
Perry Rhodan breaks up into what's called cycles. So you have episode cycles and epochs, 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 and I don't think it's problematic to say that we're doing our licensing in groups of cycles. So there is an endpoint. There is a jumping off. And
Okay.
it's a series that's kind of designed to run forever. So it would be sad. I would be very disappointed. Sam would be looking at, very unhappy numbers in his bank account. Um, but but from a creative standpoint, it's kind of not the end of the world. Now, I would love to keep putting out Perry Rhodan until I'm dead. But
Yeah, and you were talking about burnout earlier,
Yeah.
so about being burned out by isekai stories, being burned out by romance stories. And what I love about Perry Rhodan, I've been reading Perry Rhodan since I went to high school 25 years ago. So what I love about Perry Rhodan is that it's very hard. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to get burned out because it's so diverse. You have those main characters, maybe 24 of them, who accompany you from the start all through the end or to the current point in the story. But then you always have single stories that are written not from the perspective of the main characters, but every time you encounter a new civilization in space, you get maybe 1 or 2 books or chapters that are written from the people living in these aliens, from these aliens. Maybe a group of people dealing with their day of life and their problems, and that is always something fresh because you have always get the insight into alien cultures, and then you might get a story that is not from the viewpoint of the main characters, but from maybe some group of special agents of the United Space Organization or some stranded explorers on a foreign planet. And you always get those new characters and their viewpoints in. And that's why I think it's very hard, or it takes very long to get bored of Perry Rhodan.
Yeah. And Neo seems. I mean, full disclosure, I read these for fun, but I read them kind of on and off, depending on time. German's not my first language. It's very slow to read these. I could not keep up with them on a weekly basis. And, Neo, from what I read of it long before we licensed it for fun, they really like to have a lot of moving parts in these stories and a lot of puzzle pieces that come together. So I've been reading the first couple parts. Like, we just finished serializing episode 1 on the website. Episode 2 has been in progress for a while. And I just read the first 2/3 of it. And there are characters in episode 1 who don't show up at all in episode 2 because they're setting up so many other things that it's going to come together. And when it comes together, you see how it all works. But they really do it. And it's interesting in part as well because it is written like a TV series is written. You have somebody who's in charge of setting up the outline and figuring out where the story's going to go. And they have a conference and there's a discussion, and then a couple people put it all together. And then they assign out the episodes to individual authors. So everybody has a certain amount of freedom and a certain amount of leeway, and each author definitely has their own takes and spins on things. But there is this overarching thing that kind of comes together, and it's really neat to see how it works.
Interesting.
So I also haven't read the weekly booklets. I've been following the novelizations that have been. They always take 5 or 6 of them, and with some additional work, put them into one book. And at the current, I'm at volume 145, I think.
So you're only about 17 years behind serialization.
Yeah, so maybe probably a bit more.
Yeah, it used to be 10 in 1 in the Silverbender.
Yeah.
And now they write with them in mind, and so there's less that they ultimately trim.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
So the German version of the original series is at volume 3112 right now.
Wow.
And that's been let's make that clear. That's been every week since September 1961.
Oh,
Yes.
jeez.
Wow.
That's wow.
And if you put 4 of them in one book, or even, as you said, less for Perry Rhodan, then you can... okay, that's the original series. The Neo series is a reboot that started in 2011 when the original series had its 50th anniversary. And the Neo series,
Number 250 came out, I think, yesterday. It was this week.
yes.
And I need to go to the kiosk and pick it up.
Huh.
Yeah, so I haven't read Neo, so for me, the Neo publications are all new, and I'm enjoying them very much so far. I assume that the overall structure with other viewpoints and cycles is going to be kept for the Neo series.
As far as I know, it is. They make it a point that they're really good with Neo about pointing out when the jumping on points are. So I think they do try to keep the cycles fairly contained.
So then I have it clear in my head. So basically what you guys have done at this point, it's not like you've licensed 60 plus years of Perry Rhodan.
No.
You are licensing, so I understand you're licensing the Neo title, which is the one that you said started in 2011. But you're actually basically licensing arcs, if we're going to use light novel terms. Is that kind of?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so we've licensed a certain amount of issues, or episodes, I guess
Right.
is the proper term. And if it's doing well, we'll get a couple more and just, keep it going. But, we're not licensing ridiculous volumes of material.
Fair enough.
That's terrible business.
Yeah. Well,
Will
no.
spending credits on Perry Rhodan be counted towards success?
Yep.
Because you have the
Oh, yeah.
my money anyway.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We pay when you use your premium credit, that counts as a sale on the royalty report.
Okay.
And that's
because
the
so far I
same, for every series.
I hardly spent any of my credits, so I have accumulated quite a few.
Yeah, I mean that. So that's If that's something people didn't know, your premium credits on J-Novel Club, they don't count as a sale until you actually use them, and then they are used towards whatever series you bought.
Okay, interesting. Good to know.
One related question. I get most of my my light novels over Bookwalker.
They have already said they won't stock these. Though they stock them in Japan. You can buy Perry Rhodan OG and Neo on Bookwalker Japan. But we are doing premium EPUBs for these, so you can get them straight with your credits.
Okay.
And we'll be putting them up globally on the various sites.
Yeah. That's one thing I wanted to mention. Both Perry Rhodan and Perry Rhodan Neo have Japanese translations.
They do.
Yes.
And
for the original series, I looked it up. The translation is at volume 1276 right now, and the Neo series was at volume 24 when it was stopped.
Yeah.
2 months ago.
Yeah, because like a lot of people online, they thought that you were doing a Japanese cover just for the fun of it, but they already existed.
They already existed for Neo, for Perry Rhodan. For Sinclair and for Jessica Bannister, we commissioned new art.
Oh, I didn't know you commissioned new art for those. Oh.
Yeah. So Sam found Namako Sensei, who was the cover designer of Outer Ragna.
Right.
And Sam browses Pixiv a lot. This probably does not surprise anybody. And so he had seen Namako's other work. And Namako likes drawing a lot of VTubers, but he also likes drawing, sort of spooky gothic horror scenes.
Right.
And yeah, I've got the cover for Sinclair too, and it's really great. The cover for Sinclair 1 is really great. He's loving this. Or at least you can tell he's having a good time, because I've never seen anybody draw a cleaver with this level of just
So if your run of Perry Rhodan Neo goes further than the Japanese did, are you planning to commission the Japanese cover artist?
Yes, of course.
I think that was one of the things that everybody was like a little curious about, because you're licensing the text from the German publisher, so translating it from German into English, but it seems that you are using the Japanese artists for the art. So people were kind of wondering, like, what was kind of the impetus behind that? Was it because you were looking to kind of create a slightly stronger connection to the light novel market?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
Short answer.
that's as blunt as you can get. Okay, fair enough.
And also,
we didn't want these titles to stand out badly on the website.
Okay.
mm,
You know, if we had, you know, all of these things, and then we suddenly had, like, the German art for these series varies greatly. Basta Luba, who do John Sinclair and Jessica Bannister and Jerry Cotton and all of these, tend to rely very heavily on stock art for their
Yeah.
cover.
Oh.
Yeah, I
So
took a look
it's-
at those. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's stock photos or it's collage built out of stock art.
Oh, okay. So I can see where.
So the rights aren't even available to the art for those.
Right. Okay. So I
Um,
can see where there would be the drive to create your
and-
own artwork.
Yeah, and so to put that in there with Perry Rhodan, we had a lot of discussions about art for this, and the editor of the series, our translation editor, still wishes we went with the German art because she comes from a sci-fi background, and the idea is, and this is something that we discussed internally, is if you see something on a cover, you kind of know what you're getting.
Right.
Mhm.
So if you see a shirtless dude on a cover and you see a full moon and some clouds, you know it's probably a supernatural romance. Excuse me. You see a CG planet in a spaceship, and you know you're reading a space opera.
okay.
And that's great, and it's great that it tells you you're reading a space opera, but it can get really hard when you've got 30 covers on Amazon and it's a planet and a spaceship
Yeah,
to tell them apart.
like
Right.
on the
And so-
publisher's side, how difficult is it to change a cover? Like, is there a lot of negotiation needed for you to change covers?
For these, because the cover art wasn't even available, it was literally like one line in the contract that said we'd be making our own covers,
Oh,
and then we send it off for approval like anything else.
Right.
oh,
Okay.
interesting.
So for example, for John Sinclair, I will write to the licensor and say, we want to include this character and this character and this character. Here's what we've gleaned from the text of their physical description. Can you fill in any missing details? And if they have any art that they've commissioned over the years, they'll usually send that for reference, or they'll fill in any gaps from the editorial office. And we send that on to the artist.
Oh, interesting. And then the artist
Yeah.
submits what they've done, and then you submit that back to the publisher for final okay?
For final, yep.
Okay.
So it's been really straightforward. For Rhodan, obviously, because this artwork was already approved for the Japanese release, that moved really quickly.
Right.
And we were upfront that we wanted to do this. This wasn't like a bait and switch kind of thing. Like, we had our first meeting, and we're like, we want it to look like this.
Hmm.
So, they knew, everybody knew what we were signing up for. We were pretty transparent about that.
All right. Excellent.
So for Perry Rhodan, it was is pretty famous for the very extremely detailed schematics that are included in the individual volumes. So you can see for every ship class, or you can have extremely detailed deck plans and descriptions on which technology goes where. Do you plan to include some of this? Maybe as bonus material?
I don't know what exists of that for Neo.
I probably think the ships should be more or less the same.
They should, but that doesn't mean that they are. Part of the thing with Neo, and part of the difference that you have with like the original, especially the origin arcs, is that sci-fi in the 60s and during the space race was very heavy on techno-fetishism. And so if you read the original issues and installments of Perry Rhodan, there are pages about, and the ship was this many meters long, and the engine was this long, and had this many pounds of thrust, and did this and this and this. And that's something that sci-fi readers today do not give a shit about.
I think they cut all of that out
Yeah.
for the novel version because I
No,
don't
it's not, because I
remember
read the
that.
Silverbound, and there's less of it, but there's still a lot of it.
Mhm.
So it would not surprise me if also because certain aspects of design have changed over the years, and so it should theoretically be reflecting more contemporary tech. The answer is I don't know what's in the German Plattenbender.
You can look it up on the Peripedia.
I could look it up on
Um,
Peripedia, but
they
I'm
have a
on Discord. I'm on a call right now, and I have a loud mechanical keyboard.
No, and after the call.
Yeah.
So they have a complete list of all the schematics that have ever been published on Perry
Yeah.
Rhodan.
There's nothing going into our ebooks at the moment other than
Text.
probably high-res versions of the current covers.
Yeah, please consider it for the future.
Yeah, that's one of those things where I think if we ever did a print edition, we'd look into it.
But right now, there's no print on the horizon because it's obviously the same as J-Novel's other stuff, which is see how the digital goes and then make that decision, right?
Yeah. The ideal, I mean, like the ideal would be that it sells loads and loads and loads of copies. I don't think this is going to sell like Ari Ferretta or Realist Hero.
Fair.
I am enough of a realist to believe that this can be very successful, but it's not going to be like that successful. It's not going to be like Bookworm. It like kind of my ideal would be that it settles into like Happy Rokujoma like numbers.
Fair.
Where it's very respectable and very solid, and we could do a nice Kickstarter a few years down the road and put out a whole bunch in print at once. Because the other problem with really long runners is keeping them stocked in the bookstores.
Fair enough. Yeah, that is fair.
Yeah.
Now, do you plan to do any, I mean, obviously it's not as prevalent in English anymore, but do you foresee a case where you guys might look at old English pulp stuff, or is that so long out of print no? Okay. Fair enough.
There's a couple of reasons for that. One is we're a translation company.
Fair.
That's what we do. We find stuff that's really cool in other languages, and we get it into English. And that's why we don't do OEL.
Fair enough.
We love that people are writing it, but creative editing and being somebody who can take an artist's hand and guide them through a process and writing and all of that is just not what we do. Finding existing English material, there are already publishers doing that. Cursova, however it's pronounced, just did a Kickstarter to scan a bunch of stuff and do EPUBs that are like old pulps, I think, that just cleared public domain.
Okay.
So, a lot of the really great stuff, like from the 40s through the 70s, is in collections and compilations and stays in print.
Fair enough.
A lot of the really old stuff that's gone public domain is getting digitized through enthusiast circles. And the rest of it is probably forgotten for a reason.
All right. Well, I mean, fair enough. Terrence, did you have a question?
I did. This is kind of, my little selfish question. So I know you mentioned, some of these are like supernatural romance. You did also mention that, they're serialized. They have ongoing bits, but they're not necessarily ongoing. I was going to ask about, particularly these series, like, not to spoil anything, but like, is there ongoing romance with a specific romantic character for these series? Or is it, or is it more, like, girl of the week or girl of the volume for the series?
Do you want spoilers?
No.
I mean, I don't care about spoilers. I am Mr. Like, if it's well written, I don't care if you tell me how it ends because if the writing is good, then the journey is what matters.
Well,
spending time with the characters is what matters.
Just more.
But a lot of people aren't like that, so I'm asking.
No, just more in general. Like, are some of these there's one ongoing romance or not?
So I'll say this now. Sinclair has a notable bump in the road after Volume 3.
Okay.
When we shift gears of our source material.
Okay.
He has kind of a steady fling for a while. But like all good, true heroes, he is married to his work. Jessica Bannister very much always has a hunky man to swoon into, which I approve of. And there are many weddings across the history of Perry Rhodan.
Okay. All right.
Interesting.
So, you know, these are characters that you're expected to spend a lot of time with, and that's part of the tradition in the German space, is that it is about the hero character.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And that their relationships and everything else will evolve over time, just as real people do.
Yeah. Or, you know, get
Or
written out and
yeah.
changed. And,
Yeah.
All right.
So you talked, just mentioned right now the John Sinclair releases. You talked a bit about this before we started recording, so I thought it was pretty interesting. So maybe you could repeat that.
Sure. So for John Sinclair, the release is a little interesting. Back in, I think it was 2012, the licensor here in Germany tried on their own to break into the English market. And so John Sinclair is known not only for the novels here, it's a really big franchise. So there was a TV series back in the 90s, which, if you want to remain in people's good graces, you don't mention. Have you seen it?
Nope.
It's a thing. It is the kind of quality drama you expect from RTL.
Okay. I never even heard of it before.
It's out on DVD. You can send me your address on Discord afterwards. I think I might still have my copy sitting in a box of stuff to get rid of.
Oh,
and I will happily give it to a new home.
That tells you everything you need to know.
No, because to be fair, my copy of Laureate is in the same box as well. Laureate is like the German satire comedy master, and I just don't get it.
He's a bit old school. So,
he is, but you know, Nam June Paik said if you want to know a culture, watch a lot of TV, and you know, I get dinner for one, but.
And that's not even German.
And that's not even German. You know, Ben Das Brot taught me a lot about the German psyche.
Oh.
I love Band. Are you talking shit about Band?
I've actually never watched it. I'm too old to have watched it as a kid.
The newer ones I'm not so fond of, but like the proper Tolle Sachen, classic, especially if you can find the outlawed episodes. Those are great. So anyway, John Sinclair is known for like a bunch of audio dramas, and there was a TV series.
Yep.
But it's really known, like the audio dramas are a real thing among audio drama fans.
Oh. Okay.
They're well produced.
Those are really good. I've listened to a few of those.
Yeah, they're really well produced. And they're sort of semi-narrated, semi-full cast. So not quite on par with like a big Finnish drama if you're a Doctor Who fan, but more than just a standard audiobook.
Oh, okay. That's
so.
Cool.
They kind of did a two-pronged launch where they had somebody take early Sinclair stories from before it was even its own magazine, and when it was running in an anthology, and do kind of a modernization on it. And they did audio dramas of that first, and you can still buy them. You can go to john-sinclair.de and you know, I think they're like €4 each or something. They're really cheap. And so they did audio dramas, and then they novelized those back. And so, you know, when I saw that there were English stories available, I bought them, and I'm like, this seems familiar. Like I've read this in an old in Sinclair reprints, because they reprint the classic stories and put them back out in the kiosks as well. So it's like, yeah, these don't seem like it's not the greatest modernization. So like we're taking stories that were written in like 1974 and adding some backstory, like he's been to Afghanistan, and you know, he has cell phones, and I'm reading this and I'm like, even without this knowledge, something's not right here. You know, just the way the story is structured, the way the story plays out, the nature of the horror doesn't feel like 2012 or 2014. It felt like the 1970s, when you have to remember Britain in the 70s was a dump. It was an absolute hellhole. If you like, go on YouTube, find TV ads from the 70s, find news footage from the 70s. And what have you got?
That's not just because it's John Sinclair.
No. So this, you have to remember, this is an era where in 1973 you had the 3-day week, because you had so many strikes in the power sector that there wasn't enough electricity to run the country. You had hyperinflation. You had constant strikes across industry. you had a really bad economic status. This is when Britain was getting bailed out by the IMF. You know, everything was still coal-fired. If you watch the early episodes of Sapphire and Steel, there are people in areas who didn't still have indoor plumbing, who didn't have like a gas furnace. You know, you watch the first episode of Sapphire and Steel, and Joanna Lumley tells a 10-year-old, "Go start a fire in the oven."
Oh, jeez.
You know, this is the state of Britain at the time, and that definitely adds to the atmosphere. You know, this is before Soho cleaned up. This is before Blair and Cool Britannia. This is like the swinging 60s have run out, and Thatcherism and the new money haven't come in yet.
Right.
And that's the atmosphere around these stories. And moving them to a modern time didn't quite work.
Yeah, no,
So
I can see that.
we knew that these stories were altered. And when we were looking at getting the license, we were talking to the licensor, and it's like, okay, we're going to go back. We're going to get titles from the original author. The original author goes by the pen name Jason Dark. So Jason Dark's stories have been coming out. He wrote the first 1,500 issues of John Sinclair himself on a weekly basis.
Wow.
I'm going to repeat that because there's no response there, and I'm not sure if you're just that shocked or not.
Well, no, I just said wow. Like,
he wrote 1,500 installments of this series. And we knew, like, we wanted to go back to the beginning because part of what makes good horror is atmosphere.
well, yeah,
And
absolutely.
we wanted that 70s atmosphere. And so it didn't make sense to have stories that were set in 2012, and then suddenly with Volume 4, we're back in 1978. So we told them up front, we want to take these stories and put them back in the original time period. And also, they were written in American English. This is a series with British characters.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, these were things that were not insurmountable. So, we've given these the edit pass and the overhaul that they, deserve. The Sinclair editorial department has full text approval. So we have to send them the whole book before we put it up.
Right.
They do go through the text. They do look at what we do. They sign it off. They approve it. And we were very upfront that we wanted to do this because we respect the original period and the atmosphere, and we wanted it to be as smooth and seamless as possible.
Right.
Also, because before we started working on this, I'd only read the first 3, which were very close to their original stories, and then as it started to diverge, it was more like, oh shit. So starting with Volume 4, we're dealing with original stories from the 70s. Before that, we're dealing with these stories that were kind of modernized, that we've unmodernized. It's the same sequence of events. We didn't take anything unpleasant out. They're still...
You can say that again. There's a lot of unpleasant stuff.
It is. There's. Have you been reading them?
I'm up to date with the current pre-pubs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like there's a bloodbath everywhere. Like I was sending this off to people in the company, and one of them was like, "There's a lot of women getting killed in this," and I'm like, "There really are." And then the next issue, like a dude at a meat market gets killed. And I'm like, they killed a guy. Thank goodness.
So,
but I mean, like the first series that the first 2 stories that we have from Jason Dark. The first one is 3 vampire women run a nightclub and seduce a guy and kill him.
Okay.
And that's like the first scene. The second story takes place at a bordello run by demons. So when I compare these to like giallo movies, it really has that like gritty, grainy, smoky giallo vibe. And when I say this, would you imagine that story taking place in 2014?
Not really.
Yeah.
No,
So
yeah.
I wouldn't call John Sinclair gratuitous, but it's certainly graphic.
Yeah.
So
Right.
in the current, I think in the part that came out on Tuesday,
Is that Dr. Satanos?
Dr. Satanos. There's Dr. Satanos is one thing, but even before that, the suicide scene at the beginning, I thought that was one of the most intense suicide scenes I've ever read.
Yeah. I mean, Jason Dark's reputation among horror people who know Euro horror hold the series, and especially the Jason Dark stories, in extremely high regard. Because he does come up with these very intense, very creative ways of doing horror, but also giving it this mystery feel to it.
Yeah.
Sinclair's not like a random vampire hunter. He's a policeman. So there is always something sort of investigative and strange about it.
So then who's, okay, but then on the cover you guys put out, who's the Gabriel Conroy?
He wrote the rewrites in 2012.
Okay. I see.
I believe it's like 2012 to 2014. They came out over a couple of years.
Okay.
So he did the modernizations of those stories. He's technically the author of those versions.
Oh, okay.
Because they are officially adaptations. We did get the original stories, and we did look to where we could patch from the original.
Oh, okay.
So wouldn't it have been less work to just take the original Jason Dark novels and
yeah, we discovered that
again?
after we had done like 8 of these.
Oh,
Oh,
ouch.
boy.
Okay.
Because I had read the first 3 Conroy stories, which hewed pretty closely to the Jason Dark ones. And my memory, and I was going off memory, and I'm like, this isn't that far off. This should not be that much work. And it was. So we put a lot of love into this. There's a lot of love. Like
Yeah.
we really polished these up.
Yeah, so after having read the first 3 stories, they are really good, but they're certainly not for the faint of heart.
No, they are definitely adult stories.
Good to know. That is very good to know. All right, fair. Okay. Does anybody else have some questions that have come up as we've been going?
You don't want to talk about how wonderful Jessica Bannister is?
That would be the next one.
Yeah, well, well,
That's
you know
one-
what?
That's one.
Honestly, we've
And maybe the differences between Jessica Bannister and John Sinclair, because from first reading the blurb, they don't sound too different, but if you read them, they are.
well, yeah, okay. So yeah, I mean, this is something that we haven't, like, we've talked really around and about these series a ton, but we haven't really specifically gotten into. I guess Jessica Bannister would be one that we haven't talked as much about. You said this is a complete series, correct? Like it's over.
Yeah. So it ran for about 2 years in Germany.
Okay.
And then it got folded back into an anthology and then ran for like another 40 issues in this anthology.
I think it's 81 issues
Yeah.
in total.
It's something like that.
Which is minuscule compared to John Sinclair.
Well, yeah.
Terry
Yeah.
Rhodan.
And it's even more minuscule because licensing complications mean not all of the issues are available. And so John Sinclair, I should also point out, we are doing best of approach to that.
Okay.
So we told the licensor we want X number of issues, and we would like a mix of the big lore stories and just some good done-in ones.
Okay.
And they came back to us with a list, and it's easy to look them up on. There are fan sites that have reviewed like the first 2,500 issues.
Wow.
So it's really easy to look and be like, okay, this one, these really are like the gems. Like, put your best foot forward.
Okay.
Jessica Bannister kind of is the same approach, again, due to licensing constraints.
Right.
So that did run. It's that's kind of the one that always confuses people, because John Sinclair is a huge franchise and Perry Rhodan is like the gem.
Massive.
Like that's the diamond of German pulp.
Yeah.
Jessica, and people go like, why did you get this? And one, I thought it was really important that we have a title with a female lead. And 2, it's really good. I mean, and you could argue which of those is more important. It's really good is probably the most important factor, but it was important to have something that, did widen that line. We wanted to show a diversity of content. So it is definitely a mystery series with supernatural elements, whereas John Sinclair is straight up horror.
Right.
Jessica is definitely targeted more towards that like Holmes of Kyoto audience. So if you like really atmospheric mystery, the violence tends to be off screen.
Okay.
So it's not quite cozy mystery, but it's kind of like if you like Agatha Christie, if you like Golden Age mystery,
Oh.
and you want it without the racism.
Yeah.
I did a reading project where I read every Agatha Christie novel in like 2 years. And yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you like that, it really hits that sweet spot, and it is
Yeah.
that, and it is so Britpop era. It was written in the late '90s, early 2000s, and it screams that era, and I love that.
Nice.
So if I had to compare Jessica Bannister and John Sinclair, Jessica Bannister is supernatural. It has supernatural elements, but just from the first 1.5 issues that are out on Prepub so far, it could go either way. Whether it's even considered actual supernatural.
It is.
Could also,
It
is. Yes. So far it's mostly visions and bad dreams about what is going to happen. While in John Sinclair, it starts out with a full-on zombie outbreak.
Yeah. I just got the draft cover last night for was it last night? No, it was 2 days ago. We got the draft cover sketches for book 2, and it's gonna be really cool.
So
For book 2 of Jessica Bannister, John Sinclair.
John Sinclair, I've got the final art already for book 2 of that. Jessica Bannister, we just got the sketches.
So John Sinclair is supernatural and Jessica Bannister is Scooby-Doo? No, I'm just kidding.
It's reverse Scooby-Doo. I can't remember. I can't remember if it was our translator or our editor who called it this, but he called it reverse Scooby-Doo because Jessica doesn't want to believe that there's a ghost there,
Right.
and every time it turns out there's a ghost.
No, I'm not spoiling the first one.
I have a rule that the first story is never a spoiler. Sorry,
Okay,
it's the introduction. It's the setup.
Then in the first story, that's maybe half the first volume. The antagonist is not a ghost.
No.
Just a regular human, and most of the happenings that happened during the story have perfectly mundane explanations, except for Jessica's dreams.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is going to be. I assume that's going to change going on.
It varies.
It varies. Oh well, that's cool.
These are largely done in one stories.
Yeah. So there are some stories that have a supernatural bad guy and some that have a regular bad guy.
Yeah. And or even if it's a human bad guy, there is a supernatural element involved that affects the human bad guy.
Okay.
So I think that's interesting because you don't usually get that. Either you have a story with supernatural threats, or you have a story where it turns out every like Scooby-Doo, where it turns out it was all just a regular bad guy. But a mix where you have to guess every time: is this real magic, or is this just a trick? That sounds interesting.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
And sometimes it's even both. Yeah, it's a really cool series, and I'd read I think 1 or 2 of them while we were considering it, and I'm like, this is really fun, and the team are just knocking this one out of the park in terms of making sure that the atmosphere is good, the writing's good. All our teams on these are fantastic.
Excellent.
So we've got really good people, but everybody so far seems to be really pleasantly surprised by this series.
Oh.
So for Jessica Bannister, is that all written by the same author?
No. That is like Hajime Yatate. Janet Farrell is the Hajime Yatate of Pulp, I guess, in this case. In that it's not a real person, it's a pseudonym for everybody who was working on it.
Yeah, because when you said that John Sinclair was written the first 1,500 volumes by the same guy, and that's almost 3/3 of the whole series, so he must have been writing those from the early 70s, from the late 70s until.
And now now I think he only writes 6 months of them a year. He only writes.
Oh, he's still alive. Okay.
Yeah, he's still alive. The craziest thing about John Sinclair is that he didn't even visit England until 2015.
Yeah. Okay. Karl May didn't visit the U.S. at all.
But
so
it's a little different to be writing a story in 1880 and trying to get from Dresden to America than it is, to hop a plane from Cologne to London in the early 80s.
So while Perry Rhodan has been written by I think on and off, maybe half a dozen to a dozen authors concurrently who are
Yeah.
switching up week after week. I think it's about 6 to 10 that have been writing on Perry Rhodan at any one time.
That sounds about right. I think it's actually more now.
Huh.
Maybe more now, but I'm just going by the lists
Yeah.
in the novels. Then
Yeah, I mean,
you get-
the only way to...
for one cycle you get only so many different names.
Yeah. That's about right. Because they're usually doing... I can't remember if they do their conference quarterly or twice a year. But yeah, the writing on Perry Rhodan really is structured like TV writing.
Huh. Interesting. So then,
Well, no, it's structured like European TV writing. I should make that clear.
okay.
Because like American TV writing is writer's room,
Right.
so you'll have a head writer on your episode, but everybody contributes.
Yeah.
European writing is you have your showrunner who does the overarching arc, but episodes are written by individual writers.
Right. Fair. Okay. So then now just I mean just in terms of these books, at this point, have you licensed sort of an equivalent ebook release for each of these series? So I mean, let's say like we've got enough that we could do 3 ebooks for each, or is that kind of...
We licensed with a certain time frame in mind.
Ah, okay. So about how over what length of time you want to release them to test to see how it goes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. All right. Huh.
So we know we have enough content for X amount of time, and probably when we get, I don't know how much through it, enough to see if there is interest and if it sustains at all.
Right.
Then we kind of have an idea.
Now, this might be something you don't want to answer or can't answer, and it's totally cool. But do you foresee that the Pulp line's survival is based on these 3 titles, or do you think that at this point you think Pulp could survive even if these with different titles, even if these ones don't strike it, like don't seem to be viable?
I'm not well versed enough in other countries' content to comment.
Fair enough.
That it's really non-committal, but it's kind of true. You know, I live here in Germany. I read these books, so I, have an idea of what the content is like here. If I was more into Giallo, I would probably have a better idea of like what the Italian content is, and we probably would have started with that.
Right.
It's really hard to say. We definitely wanted to put again, it's a best foot forward. If you're going to do something like this, you don't start with all
B-grade stuff.
Yeah, I didn't want to start like that. But
well,
yeah,
no, but let's be fair. I mean...
if you're going to come out, if you're going to put the effort into doing this, you want to come out with the big guns blazing.
Yeah. Well, no, that's fair.
And
I also think if Perry Rhodan and John Sinclair don't manage to get a hold, then it's going to be hard for any other titles. I mean, I'm not sure about John Sinclair and the translations that has, but Perry Rhodan has been translated into at least a dozen languages, and I know at least Dutch, Portuguese, Japanese, and France are still running beyond volume 1000 until today and counting. Just English is one of the languages that hasn't been doing so well.
Yeah, the English release was always difficult with that one. Because it did start coming out.
I never understood why.
So it started coming out in the 70s. And you have to remember, before the internet, before BBSs. It came out at a time when sci-fi criticism was getting very up itself. So there was definitely a move towards more intellectual sci-fi and, more Heinlein, less Buck Rogers. I mean, Forrest Ackerman was a key figure in sci-fi in America and in English. But keeping up with the rate of release, keeping up with the rate of translation, Ackerman's wife translated most of these. So there was a limit to how much time they had to really work on it. Distribution was iffy because it's serialized. You need to have all the books. And so it was really very difficult, and the critical response to the early stories was not as good as ideal. They were doing a lot of rewrites, rearranging things. So even the versions that older fans are nostalgic for aren't one-to-one entirely with the German books at times. And then, once the sales kind of died off around like issue 200 or 250, it went away for a while. There was a group in the early 2000s who tried to do a new release starting at like issue 1800.
Oh.
Oh, yes.
And I think they got 6 issues out. And then one of the side series called Lemuria, there was a license for that. The first book came out in English in print. There was an American printing of it. But something came up between I don't know. It's very convoluted. And the rights reverted back to the German publisher. So all 6 books of Lemuria are out in English as EPUBs. And you can get them, straight from Perry Rhodan NEO. But the ongoing series, it's a big commitment.
Right.
Yes.
And it's something that, you can't just put it out for the existing fans of the franchise. There aren't they exist.
Yes.
There are people who do synopses of every new issue from German. There are people who've been doing fan translations over the years. I know they've reached out to me. There is a fandom for it, but trying to put something like this out to the existing fan base is commercial suicide. Like that's setting your money on fire and not even making a nice brick of the ashes. Oh, I'm sorry. Is my dropping of KLF Discordian lore too much?
It's all good.
No, that was just a funny analogy.
But there are people who really did that.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that we picked a way of releasing these things that were new reader friendly.
Right.
And we've kind of approached it with, yes, there are people who like these genres and these kinds of stories, and we hope to reach them. But we're running on the assumption of nil. We don't expect that the existing fan base for any of these is going to be enough to carry them. And so, that's, people asked us, a lot of people have asked us, like, it's not real Perry Rhodan because you're doing Neo. And it's like, well, I don't want to put out a series with 50 years of baggage.
Yeah, so if I have to be honest, then when I first saw you licensed Perry Rhodan, I was yay, and then I saw Neo. Why not the original series? But when I thought about it, yes, it only makes sense because the original series is set to start back in the 1970s.
Yeah.
When Perry Rhodan is instead of Neil Armstrong the first man to land on the moon, and just happens to stumble upon an alien ship there. And the Neo series is set in 2036, so it's even for people starting today. It is science fiction. It is set in a world that is not too different from our own.
No, it's a world that's incredibly recognizable in all the unfortunate ways.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
If anything, I would say that the people who started writing Perry Rhodan NEO in 2011 have been quite prophetic.
Yeah. Again, not necessarily in the most ideal ways.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I mean, if we were to release the classic series, like, where do you even start? Do we redo the Ackerman stuff so that it's more authentic? Do we just hop in and out? There's so much canon that it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for new readers in German.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's no disrespect. To build a world with this much complexity and to keep it running is an achievement, and it is commendable on every level. But if you want new readers to come in, you have to give them the most friendly version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true.
And from what I've seen, that the Neo version keeps all the strengths of the original.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to however long you manage to stretch out the Neo. The German version is running strong as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So you won't be running out of stuff to license.
No.
If you get the
Everybody
sales for
who
it.
complains, like, what do you mean this book only has like 4 volumes? Like, here's something that we will keep. People have asked, like, how long do you intend to release these? Until you stop buying them.
Fair enough.
And this literally, you can't say this for any of the light novel series that are out there.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, cancellations happen though, and that's people accuse us of like, oh, you're going after titles that are canceled because they're cheap. No, nobody wants that. You pick a title because it's good and you think it looks cool.
Yeah.
And if something happens, it's unfortunate, but it's the same thing if you're reading Western comics. It's the same thing if you're following TV series.
Yeah, but with canceled series, like, isn't there a possibility that you could reach out to the original writer to continue it, even if it's
not if you want to keep a good relationship with their publisher?
Oh.
Yeah. That's a lot of politics involved beyond that,
Yeah.
I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you know what?
I know there are a couple of series where people have asked, and
Yeah.
it's very tricky, because there's also a lot of questions about what happens when word gets back to Japan.
Yeah.
So it all is back to the burnout thing. Even the longest running series, light novel series, at some point you can't have Rimuru conquer any more planets, or there are limited number of demon lords that he can meet and interact with, or any other long running series. But for something like Perry Rhodan, if you want to do something completely new, just have the crew go off to a completely new galaxy and have them meet the peoples there. You can't ever run out of new stuff to write about.
Yep, there's always another vampire. There's always somewhere to explore, and exploration is part, and the sense of adventure is really a strength of this kind of story.
Space is vast, and a vast number of things can be encountered
Sounds
there.
like Star Trek.
Yeah. I mean, Perry Rhodan predates Star Trek.
Yeah.
Perry Rhodan predates Doctor Who.
Yeah. I think you've done. I think probably the better thing to say to light novel fans right now, who are of course familiar with J-Novel Club, like, this is an opportunity to check out stories that we could say share somewhat of that lineage, but it really seems like you guys have brought 3 titles that are very unlike the light novels that we have available to us in English. I mean, we could say like Crest of the Stars but it doesn't sound like it's really like Perry Rhodan.
To be fair, though, the publisher who puts out Crest of the Stars in Japan is the publisher who puts out Perry Rhodan.
Fair enough.
That's all they do. Hayakawa is a science fiction dedicated publisher.
Yeah.
And for people who ask, and here's the thing too, though, if we put out pulp titles that were just like the light novel titles we put out, what would be the point?
Oh no, absolutely. I think
then we just put out more light novels.
Yeah.
And and there was some feedback, not a lot. We're really happy with the response this got. I genuinely was like terrified for about 3 days beforehand, because it's like, what are we doing? Everybody's going to hate us. And there were a couple of people who were like, why do these companies who do Japanese content always, think that they should suddenly start pushing Western crap on us? It's like, well, that's why it's on an imprint. That's why it's different. And that's why we licensed and announced 5 other light novel titles at the same time. This isn't like we're giving up on Japanese series. This is, we're expanding. It's a good thing.
Yeah. No, I can see that.
I guess, like, as, a fan of, like, these kind of genres and things, it'd be nice if there's a reverse, like, osmosis effect too. Like, if this builds up, sci-fi and horror more, and we can get, even more Japanese titles too, in those genres. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're not completely blind. Like, Sam loves hard sci-fi. I love hard sci-fi. But we also are familiar with the story of Haikasuru.
Yes.
And like I have access to books, and
Yeah.
I've seen how Legend of the Galactic Heroes sold, and I love Legend of the Galactic Heroes. That's like my favoriteest thing ever.
Mm.
And you're taking my Noboru Ishiguro signed Laserdisc out of my cold dead hands. Um, but I know how that series sold, and it's tragic. We and so for whatever reason that company's titles, and I'm only willing to talk about it because it is a past tense now.
Yeah.
They didn't take.
Yeah.
The sci-fi crowd didn't warm up to it for some reason.
Well, and I don't think,
And-
and again, it's not like we're saying anything bad about it. Like, they put out
Yeah.
quality stuff. But as
Oh,
you
yeah.
said,
I
it's
mean-
just, unfortunately, the audience obviously did not embrace it in a way that, could keep it going.
And and likewise, we remember when, like I said earlier, when the first manhwa releases came out.
Yeah.
And if we were gonna do something different, it had to be something different enough that it merited doing.
I think that's I think that's fair. And I think certainly I will fully admit that when this was announced, I scratched my head and kind of was like, I don't really get it. But hearing you today and speaking to you today, it does make sense at this point. Like, I do sort of see where the thought process was at, and that you're right. Like, at this point, it wouldn't make much sense for J-Novel Club to try and get involved in, as you said, the Korean or even Chinese space. Yeah. Especially, I think you would have had more backlash even there too, because people would have been like, well, if you're going to license Korean and Chinese light novels, why don't you just license more Japanese light novels? Because, that's what we signed up for.
Yeah. And so, we're not, abandoning Japanese titles. Trust me, I've seen, what we've just signed on. We have very long meetings to go through new title listings, and, we make a lot of offers. So you're not getting less Japanese content because of this. Trust me.
Yeah.
You are definitely not getting fewer Japanese books. You're not getting lower tier Japanese books.
Yeah, it's different translators of
Yeah, it's different. Yeah. I'm trying to think how much of the staff, 2 editors. No, actually, no, that's not entirely. It's not even all different translators, because Phil, who's one of the translators on Neo, also translates Mariel Cleric and Girls Kingdom. Phil is trilingual. He used to work for Nintendo of Europe.
Oh.
And quit to go freelance. So Perry is actually his, this is so straightforward book. Because when you're trying to like work out Japanese romantic prose, where it's all about what you aren't saying, suddenly technobabble is like, at least you know who the subject of the sentence is.
Well, fair. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the languages German and English are a lot closer than English and Japanese.
Yes.
And this was actually part of the trouble we've had with some of the startup, is figuring out like how much faster can you release as a result of that.
Yeah, when I saw your release schedule originally, I thought, okay, 4 issues of John Sinclair a week, and the whole book.
But it's one issue though.
Yeah. That's but parts. I meant parts.
We're slowing that down. We are going to slow that one down.
Yeah, that's I wasn't aware that there already was an English translation that you just adapted.
I mean, I would say we retranslated it.
Yeah, almost. Sounds of it.
And again, like, we're not doing that to the Jason Dark stories at all.
Mm-hmm.
If we come across problematic 1970s issues, the first thing we'll do is email the licensor and say, how should we address this?
Yeah.
And we were very clear that will be happening. Should that be a thing? Mirage, I am sure that you've seen Auto de Film, and you know that there's a scene in that movie that will never play in America.
I've seen it 20 years ago, but I think I remember it, yes.
So...
Let's just say, back then here in Germany, blackface wasn't as reviled as it is.
Yeah, okay. I get what you're
wasn't.
saying. Yeah, well, okay.
It's still
It is still
Um,
very uncomfortable to turn on Bayerische
yeah.
Rundfunk at times.
Carnival is very loved tradition here in Germany, and using blackface at a carnival party is nothing anyone would blink over.
I get it. Yeah, well, okay.
It is
yeah.
very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so but it's not something that we would it's not changing for the sake of changing. It is like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, no,
Yeah.
but I mean that makes sense. Like you don't, especially if you, especially if you're cultivating an audience that then turns around and is like, I can't read this anymore because of one thing or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that
I
has,
mean-
I've seen that with some Japanese novels recently. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
there have been little things that come up, and like I said, the licensors have full text approval on these.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, that is probably the biggest difference in terms of licensing work compared to working with Japan,
Mhm.
is more people speak English here,
Right.
and more people speak like fully fluent business grade English, and so they are very invested in the quality of their translations.
Well, fair enough. Well, but I mean that I think that speaks highly to the company themselves as well and how they
Oh,
do
yeah.
their work. So I think that's actually really encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
So,
And yeah, like I forgot what the question had been. It was something about like cultivating audience and things and finding it. Yeah, like I'm not saying it to brag, but part of I think also, oh no, it's going back to like why Rhodan didn't come out in English, and some of it, and because this was something that was on the mind, and I think part of what won them over is that we do have like the subscription plan and the pre-pubs and all of that,
right.
because it's a model for putting out bulk translation.
Yeah.
Well, and it gives a chance that you have an audience who could be potentially more willing to try something different because it's not costing them anything extra.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I have a follow up to that. So, I maybe you're not at liberty to say, but do you think that at some point these, if you're familiar with the whole catch up title system that they do, is that a possibility at some point that these could be on catch up? Okay, all right, great. Yeah,
there is nothing in our catalog that is not eligible for catch up.
Oh, great. All right.
So there you go. If you're a JNC member, you have as equal access and everything else to Pulp as you do anything else. So
to Pulp, to Heart, to manga.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. I think that's great. Wow.
So
okay.
And I know where my credits are going.
Yeah, me too.
Foreseeable future.
just remember, we do every so often have that discussion about how can we gift premium editions. Updating your website, it never ends.
Right. Oh yeah, I can imagine. All right. Well, Jonathan, you know what? This has been really informative, and I think has sort of given us a lot of the answers that everybody kind of had about what pulp is and how it exists and why it exists, and where you guys are taking this in the future. I really appreciate you coming today and talking to us.
And we kept it under 2 hours.
We did keep it under 2 hours. Amazing. So yeah,
I mean, I'll keep answering questions. So you don't want to like do a rundown of new manga and print stuff then too while we're at it? No. I really, you know what? I think I want dinner.
Well, fair enough. Well, it's coming up.
It's coming up on like 6.
It's coming up to lunchtime for us in the Eastern time zone too. So, but no, I really wanted to focus on pulp because we talk about print editions and stuff like that. Otherwise, right? I because this is something quite new, especially for J-Novel Club, that has very quickly risen to be one of the primary suppliers of light novels to the light English fan base. I really wanted to focus on just spotlighting this because it is different and it is offering stories that are unlike what we have been getting mostly in light novels, and to encourage people to check it out and see what they're like. And I mean, even as Terrence was saying, we could also potentially see, like a lot of us have said, why can't we get light novels that aren't isekais or fantasy and stuff like that? But, showing interest in these kind of titles, horror and sci-fi and stuff like that, I mean, it speaks to what the fan base wants in general, not only just from pulp, but also from light novels and everything else that J-Novel does.
Yeah, and who knows? These might be the thing that bridges light novels and the sci-fi fantasy community.
Yeah, I've always found it sad that the only hard sci-fi title we have from light novels is Quest of the Stars.
Well,
there's really nothing else out there.
I mean, sometimes it's finding the right title.
Right.
And sometimes it's a case that they're coming out on I don't want to say like not light novel publishers, but a lot of the really big titles will come out from publishers who expect the full literary translation treatment.
Right.
So it'll be things like, you're going to arrange a book tour, right?
Oh, okay.
You're going to sell like at least 50,000 copies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
and it's just not that. Yeah, it's just not that as realistic an impression of what the Western book market is like.
Yeah, I mean, like every so often I'll find a title. I'm old, like I'm pushing 40, and so every so often there'll be a title that pops up like from the 90s, and I'm like, Sam, we should totally like go back and get this. And he's like, are you gonna pay for it? And even then, no. So, I mean, it's rough. And it's also rough because, find like a lot of the really newer sci-fi stuff, it does either get picked up by the sci-fi publishers. So it gets picked up like by Tor and by Baen.
Right.
You're seeing a lot of sci-fi coming out of China, especially right now. Getting picked up by the big sci-fi publishers.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And so it's finding the right title, finding the right hook, and some of that is also the trends in anime. You don't see the level of hard sci-fi anime that you did in the 80s.
That's true.
No.
I would love for Perry Rhodan to get an anime adaptation.
I would too. I think that's about the only way it will ever happen as a TV series.
Yeah.
Would be
it would be much too expensive with all the CGI.
I mean, like I actually on a whim, like just like when I was still working in video stuff and I had some connections, I was like, I wonder if I could like just hash out a treatment for how this would actually work. And I got something that was feasible, but not necessarily practical or viable or good. But I'm like, I think I found a model where this could actually exist. And then I never showed it to like anybody again.
I mean, if I ever won 8-digit number on the lottery, which is hard because I don't play, then I would totally finance the Perry Rhodan anime.
Yeah, I mean it's doable, but I feel like the problem is you would have to do at least 52 episodes just to get through the exposition.
Yep.
Wow.
And
with today's audience to get that kind of commitment, it's so hard.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched Inoue Teza, but I think it's also kind of telling that the best thing that Inoue Teza seems to be doing is getting people to watch the original version of Galactic Heroes.
I mean, if it has had the production values, then
it's production IG. Like it should have been good. My problem is that the character designs look like they belong in a gacha game.
I mean, Perry Rhodan. If it had the production values, it could be an incredible anime.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would love to see like a production IG or a Sunrise, or wherever Masao Moriyama is currently working. And the thing is, Perry Rhodan does have a really solid following in Japan. Like Sam has gone to meetings in Japan with the publishers, and he'll sit down and he'll be saying like, yeah, oh, and we're doing this thing, and we're starting to put out German series like Perry Rhodan, and they're like, oh my god, I've been reading that for years. So it clearly has its inroads and its followers.
Yeah.
So maybe, fingers
Um,
crossed, it might happen someday.
It might happen someday, but I so don't want to be the person responsible for it.
Well, there you go.
Being responsible, like being responsible for this series and for this generation and its attempt to publish in English it's a weight.
Huh.
You're standing on the shoulders of giants, hoping not to be cold.
Fair enough.
And it's the same thing with Sinclair. Like these are properties where and I say that like, and it sounds so crass to call it a property. These are series and characters and worlds that mean a lot of things to a lot of people and have a lot of history. And you don't want to screw up something like that.
I bet. I can see where that
So-
would. Yeah. Well, I guess all we can say is good luck.
Thank you. And yeah, if you're a subscriber and you've got some time,
Check.
have a read.
Mhm.
People seem to be responding. Once people are taking the dive, they seem to be responding really well.
Cool. Well,
Nobody has said that they like read it and they think it's garbage yet, which makes me happy.
there you go.
But people thought Hit by a Truck was actually good, and I'm still shocked because I wrote that in like an hour.
Oh man.
Oh yeah.
I was gonna ask who wrote that, so that was you.
I did.
Oh, okay.
I wrote it, and the team had some input into a couple of the jokes
Right.
and a couple of the clues. And Stephanie, our amazing marketing person,
Yeah.
who does all of our social, all of those photos, all of like the ad photos. She is so incredible. She did the artwork for that.
Oh, really? So she was the actual artist.
She was the actual artist.
Why did I
and-
not? I didn't catch that. That's. Oh.
I think because they changed the name on the
Yeah,
cover.
it was under-
originally.
Okay.
Originally, I just had it as J-Novel backwards, and when they were doing the cover and the metadata, the rest of the team added a few little bits and pieces to that. People really liked that. Like,
Huh.
like I thought people would be focusing on the clues, and then somebody wrote fan fiction, and it's like, what the hell?
Well, I will admit that you did get a couple of original English light novel authors. Their hearts started beating fast because they thought, is J-Novel going to start publishing OELs? Like, I can almost hear the submission letters being written. You know.
I'll tell you what I have a standard response for this, which is, you don't need us. If you're an OEL light novel author, like, I'm not kidding. Like, and Justus, I'm saying this with full respect for everything you write. You don't need us to be a successful author these days.
Well, no, I know that's true.
Go out there, self-pub, put it up on Smashwords, put it up on Streetlib.
I
Do
already
a small
do.
press and get do a small press and get an artist alley table. Like, we cannot offer you anything that you cannot do yourself if you're an English light novel author.
That's fair.
And that's a fantastic state of the world to be in.
Yeah.
That is very fair. That is very fair. And you know what? You're absolutely right. Even like I had considered trying to create an OEL publishing company myself, and I thought, and that was the same thing that I came up against was, what can I really offer people that they can't do themselves?
The thing that you can offer as a publisher would be editorial.
And
Would be to have people, and I don't just mean copy edit,
no,
but to have people who really understand plotting
Yeah.
and character, and who can
yes. And
work with you in that sort of dramaturgical sense.
yeah, it's really just it's the cost. It's footing the cost of art,
Yeah.
footing the cost of having proper editorial work. Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah, because
that's exactly
like
it.
once you start printing in quantity, print's not that expensive.
No, that's
Warehousing
fair.
can be that expensive. Distribution can be that expensive.
Yes.
But that's what it is. Find a small press who specializes in genre.
Yeah.
Do it yourself. Be creative. Make something.
Yeah.
And just because J-Novel Club isn't going to publish your OEL doesn't mean you're not a good author. It doesn't mean you're not successful. It's just not what we do.
Yeah. Well, no, absolutely.
It's not what we do except on April Fool's Day.
Except on April Fool's. And you know what? It was fun. It was fun as hell. I'm not going to lie. It was.
The sad thing is I thought of what to do for another chapter.
Hey, you can write volume 2 for your next one, for the next announcement.
I could, but it's bleak.
Oh.
My original fiction stuff tends to be really, really bleak. So.
Okay, all right. Well, fair enough.
As you learn, So yeah. All right.
All right, cool.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend. You can hear the church bells.
Yeah, there is the church bells.
Yes.
All right. So, Jonathan, it's been great talking to you. I really do. Again, I appreciate you coming and talking to us.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey,
Thanks
not
for
a
joining
problem.
us.
It's been great. And of course, to the listeners, thank you so much for checking this out. If you're a J-Novel Club member, don't forget that you can check this out with your membership for free. Check out all of the pulp stuff that's being offered. You can use your...
And if you're not a member, you can still get a free preview.
And if you're not a member, oh, that's true. You guys do offer some free previews for the very opening as well. So you can go over to j-novel.club and check it out. So you can check out the first little bit for totally free. And if you're a member, you can read all the parts as they're posted. Your credits can be used towards pulp titles, and it does count as a sale. So if you want to support it that way, you can. Or if you really just want to wait, you can wait until these come out in ebook format. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff on the horizon, it sounds like. Looking forward to it. All right, so.
Me too.
So again, listeners, thank you so much for listening. And we'll talk to you in the next one. Bye-bye for now. For show notes and related links, visit lightnovelpodcast.com.